Good afternoon and welcome to Burns & Levinson's Divorce Law Monitor webinar series. This is our third in hopefully a long series, and today we are speaking about the children and what about the children and how we put them first in the divorce process. I am here with my colleague and fellow partner, Tiffany Bentley, and also am joined by Dr. Sharon Gordetsky. And Dr. Gordetsky is a child and family forensic psychologist, has acted as a GAL in a number of cases, as well as a parent coordinator. And she's here to provide us with her expertise on family dynamics, children and divorce, and how to protect the children going forward.
Am I on?
You're on. Welcome.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I think good. So first, I want to say that just by sort of tuning into this webinar already tells me a lot about you as a parent or parents. And so what you're telling me that you're thinking very carefully and seriously about your children. And the decision to separate and divorce requires a lot of thought. So I'm glad you're thinking ahead. It can be complicated in many ways, obviously financially, legally, professionally, and often the most complex is emotionally. This is a major family transition. And, as Francine said, that I am a child family forensic psychologist, and beside doing hundreds of GALs and parent coordination and do a lot of consultation to parents, which I call it child-focused consultation, which really focuses on the children. And then I do a lot of child therapy, and about 65 to 70% of my patient load are children whose parents are in the process of divorcing or separated or have been divorced for many, many years and the children are still sort of struggling. And I'll go into some reasons why that might be a little bit later on. So my role in this webinar is to highlight what you need to consider when contemplating the impact of family separation and the impact that this family separation will have on your children. I'm also here to tell you what to consider when telling your children their parents are separating or divorcing. So I'm going to go pretty slowly because when I do consultations, I know the people that in the old times when they would actually sit in my office, they would usually want to take notes. So I'm going to go slowly. So if those of you would like to take down notes, you can do it. Also, what I understand from our tech people, which is not me, is that you're able to chat in, right, Francine? They're able to
That's correct.
Chat in comments or questions so that if you want any of us to say some more about that, we'll be able to do that. So,
before...
Go ahead,
sorry, Sharon.
Yeah.
Before we have you go into your expertise, I think Tiffany's just going to summarize for us a couple of the legal pointers, if you will, at the very beginning, what we need to consider and what terminology and legal jargon, if you will, that we need to share with our clients. And then I will quickly summarize some of those important people, like I mentioned earlier, parent coordinator and GAL. And then Sharon will let you steal the show.
That's okay. They need you as much as they need me for this process really to go smoothly. And I do want to say also that in considering lawyers, and I've been doing this for decades, that there are lawyers, and the two that are here with me today are lawyers that will keep in mind about what is in your children's best interests. And not all the lawyers will do that. Obviously, they're going to be taking also in mind what's going to be in your best interest in representing you. but there are attorneys and that lean either way. So take it away, Francine.
Thank you. Tiffany, I'm going to let you start off.
Right. All right. Well, thank you both. I'm happy to be here. As Francine said, I'm Tiffany Bentley. I'm a partner here at Burns & Levinson, and I divide my practice between domestic relations matters as well as probate litigation. My role in the webinar today is to give a little overview of the types of decisions in the divorce process that you will come across that are going to have an impact on your children. So things to be aware of and things to be thinking about throughout the process. And the simple answer to that is that all of them, all of the decisions that you're making as you're getting divorced and going through the divorce process are going to have some impact on your children. These are financial issues as well as non-financial issues, and the impact, depending on what the issue or the decision is, could be a direct impact on your kids or a more indirect impact on them. So just as an overview, in terms of non-financial issues, we're talking about custody here, and custody means a lot of things. There is what we call legal custody, which is decision-making for the children, and whether that will be one person vested with sole legal custody or sole decision-making, or whether it will be a joint custody and joint decision-making situation. And when we are talking about this decision-making, we're really talking about the major decisions for the kids, medical decisions, education decisions, religious decisions, and not so much the day-to-day things that come up, which each parent really does get to control and decide in their own homes post-separation. But for those big issues, that's what we're talking about when we refer to legal custody. There's also a term called physical custody, which we actually don't say as much as we used to. We don't talk about who has physical custody of the children. We talk about what the parenting schedule is going to be. And the judges have really encouraged us to start using that term, which lends itself more to shared parenting than saying who has custody of the kids. As a side note, I know from some colleagues of mine in other areas of the country that their terminology is even more outdated than some of ours might be. In Texas in particular, they talk about time of possession like children are footballs. So we don't we don't want to do that here. We want to talk about sharing parenting time and coming up with schedules that are in the best interests of the children. When we're doing that, there are actually a lot of different things to think about and consider. There's the base schedule, sort of what's happening week to week on a rotating basis. And then you also want to talk about holidays and vacations and other special events. And there are some families and some situations where we get very, very detailed in terms of holiday schedules and which holiday goes with whom and at what time of the day and all of that. And there are other families that are able to do that more cooperatively on an ongoing basis. And so when people come in and they ask us, what do you typically see for X, Y, or Z holiday or vacation? The answer is that there's nothing typical. And the overarching standard is what's in the best interest of the children. And that's going to be very fact specific and very dependent on what your relationship is, what your family's needs are, what the old traditions were, and what the new traditions will be. And it's important to remember that, that there will be new traditions moving forward. And when we're talking about holidays in particular, holidays are just days, and they're going to start to look different for you post-divorce than they might have when you were living in an intact family. So all things to be considering there. And one decision that is really important in all of this and all of the parenting time is geography. Where are each of you going to live post-separation? Are you going to be living in the same town where it's easy for the kids to go back and forth, maybe even multiple times per week for transitions? Or is there a little bit more distance between the two homes so that, you know, different structured schedules need to be put into play? There are also a lot of financial issues that are going to have impact on the children. So this will be child support. It'll also be who's going to carry the health insurance, and how are the parents going to divide other expenses for the children, whether it be extracurricular activities, camps, uninsured medical expenses, and ultimately college. And again, there's no right answer. It's all going to depend family to family. You'll also want to think about, with respect to the shared expenses, what the mechanism will be for reimbursement, whether you tally up receipts and share them monthly or quarterly, and how you go about reimbursing each other. So a lot of details to focus on through the divorce process. But what I'll say is that the most critical decision is not one that ultimately is going to be written into words in your separation agreement or your divorce contract. It's really the decision that you make in the process to be a co-parent. So this is more of a lifestyle choice than a legal decision. And what it means to me is making an affirmative decision to look past whatever you perceive to be the other parent's flaws, whatever led to the breakdown of your marriage. And you're each, I'm sure, going to have very different perspectives on what that is. But you look past that and you decide to create an accepting and cooperative environment between your two homes post-divorce. And this doesn't mean that you're going to like everything that the other person does or says, and I'm quite sure that you won't actually, but you make the choice and the decision not to get bogged down by those differences and to try to keep things amicable and cooperative and focused on the kids, both while you're going through the divorce process and then as you live your lives after the divorce. So
Thank you,
Francine, I'll
Tiffany.
turn it back to you to talk about the different professionals that we use to help us through this process and making some of these decisions.
Thank you. So sometimes there's two different ways to approach the custody matters. I would say a formal and informal. Both are really important, but sometimes the informal way is the more cooperative way. At the outstart, there are lots of parents who consider having a family therapist assist them, someone like Sharon, or parents, moms and dads will seek out the assistance of what we call a parent coach. And Sharon can certainly provide us with some specifics on a parenting coach and maybe her role as a parenting coach. But how divorce attorneys see parenting coaches are someone who really has the ability to attend to and take care of the emotional needs of both parents and bring them together and maybe remind them that the most important person or people in their lives need their focus and attention, and they need to be put first. And those, of course, are their children. A parenting coach is not necessarily appointed by a judge, doesn't have any type of legal authority, but can be really essential in helping parents refocus and be able to communicate with one another, maybe not directly, but with this parent coach who again can kind of recenter everyone as to what's important. Another professional that can help is a parent coordinator. A parent coordinator many years ago was a person that the court would appoint and help make decisions, more immediate decisions. And about 3 years ago, the court came up with a very long, drawn out requirement for parent coordinators. There are over 40 hours of training that is needed by a parent coordinator. And oftentimes parent coordinators are either mental health professionals, someone like Sharon, who is a PhD, mental health professionals who are just licensed social workers, or could be just an attorney like myself, where we, play referee, if you will, with a parent or parents who have an immediate need or decision to be made. Sometimes those immediate decisions have to do with pick up and drop off times or transitions. Sometimes those decisions with the parent coordinator is something much more complex and helps parents first negotiate the decision and ultimately make a decision. A parent coordinator gets his or her authority through the court, and parents have the ability to provide that parent coordinator with as little or as much authority as they see fit. There are some instances that parent coordinators make final decisions, such as school choice, which can be a huge decision, but is necessary, and often PCs are a welcome arm of the court. Another professional is what we call a GAL, a guardian ad litem. And that is someone who is appointed by the court, who does an investigative report, interviews mom, interviews dad, or interviews mom and dad, interviews the child or children and other important people in the children's life, such as a physician, a teacher, a coach, anyone who would have knowledge and understanding as to each parent's role in terms of how they parent their children. And a GAL then comes up with a long report, a detailed report, to provide the court with some insight as to this family and what the children need and their respective best interests. Oftentimes, a GAL will also provide recommendations as to what the parenting plan should be. And I know that Sharon has also worked in that role throughout the years as well. So those are the three most important professionals, if you will, that are associated with the court. There are, of course, therapists and therapeutic relationships that need to be made and that should be maintained through a divorce situation, but don't necessarily connect with the court directly. But that is where a family therapist, a child therapist, and the ability for the family therapist and a child therapist and the therapist of each parent should have open lines of communication to make sure that the children really are put first. Sharon.
Whoa. All I know, for those of you who are listening, is that what sort of the gems that both Tiffany and Francine just sort of gave you could and probably should each be their own webinar. Because I've known this stuff for years. I'm going, wait. So I'm only going to say a couple of things just to clarify, because then I really want to get on to my role. One of the really important differences between a guardian ad litem is what parents and children and anybody else at the guardian ad litem, whether it's pediatricians and teachers, it is not confidential. And that is a very, very different than the role of the child therapist, even family therapist, obviously. So it's a very different role. And again, we could do a whole webinar, on that. And so when there is a guardian ad litem appointed, then everyone needs to know, and that guardian ad litem gives what's called a lamb warning, which basically is saying and says to children that what you tell me is not private. So I'm going to stop there because that is, again, it could be a 5-minute discussion. And also there's two different kinds of guardian ad litem appointments. One is a category E, which is usually a mental health provider, and it is an evaluation, an evaluator, and there's a category F, which is usually or often an attorney. Sometimes it's a mental health professional, and that's really an investigation. And whether a guardian ad litem gives recommendations or not is dependent upon the judge, as well as the judges, and usually their attorneys are part of this, guide the guardian ad litem as to what the court wants in particular, wants the guardian ad litem to consider. And let me see. Oh, and a couple of things that Tiffany said, I do want to underline that we say parenting plan now. We don't talk about physical custody, and it's for very good reasons, because a parent is a parent. And I talk about parenting plans, and we do not use the word visitation anymore. And I use the word parenting time or parenting plans, even if one parent might just see their children 4 weeks in the summer and maybe, 3 other weeks during the year, because there are some cases where a parent lives in a different country. But I would still consider that parenting time. All right. So now I'm going to go on and see where I left. So it's always better for the parents to tell their children together that they have come to this decision about separating and divorce. It is always good to prepare what you're going to say, and important, be calm, even if you have to fake the calm part. And there will be many times when people working with you will say, just fake it. No matter how mad you are, maybe how frustrated you are, how scared you are. So this is a time about just faking it and trying to sort of be calm. The important message to be relayed is something like, and again, it's tailored to different families and situations, that everyone in our family is okay. I mean, when parents say to kids, we want to have a family meeting, we're going to have a family meeting to start it. Everyone in our family is okay, but there is going to be a change. And then who's ever talking could say, soon Dad and I, or the mom and I, are not going to be living together anymore. Your mom will always be your mom, or if your dad will always be your dad, and nothing will ever change that. We both love you very much. We want you to be close to both of us, and we want you to be comfortable and happy with both of us in each other's homes. Now, obviously, some situations might specifically change, but I'm talking about sort of the more generic now. It's important to remember that this is going to be your first family conversation about this. And like other important aspects of your child life, you are going to have this family conversation a number of times. It's like you just don't have one sex talk with your kid. It happens over time in different ways from their different developmental stages. And that's the same thing. So sometimes these initial conversations might last 5 minutes. And sometimes, they might last 15 or 20 minutes. And it's okay, because children have their own way of processing highly charged emotional information, and they do it in their own way. Often in bits and pieces. And this is what I refer to as manageable doses. Because some kids, they're going to hear this, they're not going to be able to tolerate, listening to much more. So even children of similar ages might have very, very different reactions. And those reactions are likely to change over time. These emotional reactions will include anger, sadness, initial shock or denial, or I already guessed that's what you were going to talk to us about. Like, I already knew this. That's what I thought. And many children often sense it and do have a clue. Children of different ages and different developmental stages are likely to experience the news of this major family transition differently. And again, you're going to hear me use the words major family transition a number of times. And during this short time together, we don't have time to describe the specific characteristics of each developmental stage that will impact your children's understanding of what you're telling them. But you already know, for those of you, your preschoolers will understand this family conversation different than your school-age children, and differently from your teenage children, and differently from your young adult children. And yes, your adult children will have their own reactions as well. Throughout the separation divorce process, there will be numerous decisions that will impact your children's development, and Tiffany, sort of talking about that earlier. I want to emphasize, as a child psychologist who have been doing this for decades, and the research backs me up, well, I know this from the research, is that most of the children of divorce do just fine. A lot of parents, ask, am I screwing my kid up forever? I go, well, in some respects, it's up to you, But the research shows, longitudinal research, who studied children of divorce for decades, show that most of them are no different than non-divorce families. That means they'll have the same amount of learning disabilities, the same amount of challenges, the same amount of successes and fabulous accomplishments. So no, you're not going to screw them up. Most of the children do just fine. However, I think, as Tiffany was hinting, there are decisions that parents must make, and they can be more or less helpful in their children's stability, feelings of security, and eventual happiness. In addition to the parenting plan that parents work on together and with their attorneys, There are considerations such as how close or far apart should we live from each other? How involved or uninvolved can the children or should the children be in some of the decisions that we have to make? Although this will vary from child to child and depend on your individual child's age, not only their age, but their personality. And then I'm going to say two things that are really important for you to keep in mind: their resilience and their vulnerability. And all 7-year-olds are not the same, all 4-year-olds, all 14-year-olds. They are different in how resilient they are and how vulnerable they are. And it might differ in the same family. But that's why it's going to be so important to take these things, to think about them and to take them under consideration. But children need to be protected from this very vulnerable stage of family transition and family development. It's a stage, it will pass. But during this time, they also really need to be protected from parental conflict around the issues of separation, divorce, and around the decisions and the differences that their parents might have. So let me emphasize that regardless who initiated the separation, or even at times when it's been mutual, and I'm sure Francine and Tiffany and I have seen where it's been mutual, every family member will feel emotional and vulnerable. No matter what your children's ages, children will pick up on your moods and on your attitudes, on your anxiety, on how sad you feel. They will pick it up. And your children might become more moody, and some might develop behavioral issues. So during this process, there are some very definite do's and don'ts for parents and for extended families. And I put that in because, you might have an aunt, an uncle, a grandmother, or grandfather that might say something to their kids that will be more or less, to your kids, to their grandchildren, that will be more or less helpful or unhelpful. Children need to be protected from legal and court issues. They need to be kept out of the middle of their parents' disagreements, particularly around things that you might be discussing with your attorneys or with your friends. They need to be protected from that. It's not necessary that they know when you're going to court. And I think we've had cases, all of us, where in fact, parents leave legal documents around or their computer open to it, and their children read it, and they will read it if they're old enough to read. They particularly need to be protected from having to choose sides or advocating for one or the other parent, unless there are very specific extenuating circumstances, such as domestic violence or serious mental illness. Parents should work together to support their children. Similarly, children benefit when their parents work collaboratively and cooperatively, and you heard those terms from both Francine and from Tiffany. That's when they do best. And this will impact their future. So whether you remain an intact family or a separated or divorced family, please, 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 please remember that you will always be your children's primary role models, including the role models for current and future interpersonal relationships. Observing their parents negotiate this very complicated, emotionally charged, major family transition. I'm going to turn my page here. Will give them an opportunity to see, how do people love each other and then not love each other? How do people get angry with each other? How do they problem solve together and respect each other even during very, very difficult times? So those are my sort of brief summary comments that I thought was really important for parents to know. And where should we go from here? So the three of us can talk, or I don't know if there's been any inquiries on the chat.
I don't see anything on the chat or the Q&A, but I did want to chime in on what you said, Sharon, about the very important don't of not exposing the children to the conflict or to the divorce process. And it's not just leaving court paperwork around or leaving your computer open. What I've seen on a few different occasions is parents leaving books on their nightstand or in the living room, you know, how to survive your relationship with a narcissist or things like that, right? And the kids know what that is and what that's all about and how you're feeling. So just being as careful as you can to shield them and protect them from this process and make sure that they know it's okay for them to still love their other parent and they should love their other parent. And
you want them.
Right.
You know that if they love their parent, and if that parent can be the best parent that he or she can be, that's only going to be good, you know, for your child or for your children. And I'm glad you brought out books because, you know, the first steps in getting divorced or whatever, there's all of these self-help books, you know, around. Kids are nosy. Parents often ask me, not, you know, about separation, divorce, but about lots of things is, you know, they say, I don't think that the kids know this. And I say, I always assume that children will know it. And 5% of the time or 3% of the time, I'm wrong. The other thing is being on the telephone or being, well, on your cell phone and talking. When you think the children are watching a video or TV and they're not listening, or you think they're in the bath, or you think they're sleeping and they hear. So it's the other thing to be very, very careful of about who you're talking to. You know, even when you're talking to a very, you know, supportive person, because they're going to be very, very curious. And I think the other thing about children, especially children of separation, divorce, and I'm talking about even later in their lives, is that they become hypervigilant. Their antennae is always up, looking for a change, again, looking for a parent's attitude. We have other family situations where this happens too. For example, if a family's member suffers from an illness or a substance use problem, children just, as soon as their parent might walk into a house or they walk into a parent's house, they are going to sense, as I said, the moods, the attitudes. And this is going to affect and impact their level of comfort, their level of security. And we all want, whether intact families or not, we want our children to feel safe and secure and have a good, really good, positive self-esteem.
Yeah, and keep it off social media too. I don't care how private you think your profile is. It's out there forever, and your kids are better at finding that stuff than you are at locking it down.
True. Sharon, do you have an opinion as to when parents should tell their children? I mean, I know that Tiffany and I have had situations where there is an immediate separation of parents, sometimes because of, you know, maybe some police involvement. Or there are times when parents really are going to live together until certain events can happen, like a sale of a home or the purchase of a new home. Do you have any recommendation as to when that should happen? Like, for example, parties that are continuing to live together, should they maybe tiptoe around one another and not tell their children? Or when there's going to be an immediate change, how quickly do you tell a child or children? I don't know if you have any opinion as to timing and how that plays into, you know, kind of keeping the children informed, but also not telling them too much.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, and it varies so much. Often people will seek, again, consultation about those things. And I know that Francine was talking about the different roles, and she's talking about parent coach. I like to call it, what I do is child-focused parent consultation. So they might come in and just have that question. And then I have to say, well, what's your situation? You know, what's the situation? As well as they sometimes just come in and say, how do we tell them? And we go through their kids and their ages and, again, their resilience and vulnerability. because it depends upon first of all, depends very much on the level of acrimony and the level of being amicable. That for anybody when there is tension and anxiety, et cetera, that's when I would advise, and everybody's walking on eggshells, let's find a different solution. Even if a house can't be sold, even if there's, other things, let's look at different solutions. And I know that there's different plans, like the nesting plan, for example, where the children will stay in the family home and the parents will move, either if they have an apartment or to their own parents' house or whatever. And obviously that would need to be communicated before that. But the other thing is that sometimes parents, if they're not doing that, they're in the home, but they move out of the bedroom. And children will notice, and they're going to ask. And one of the things I love about children, and I love, doing child therapy before COVID, is that they just say things. And that's what we want. We want children to always feel comfortable asking what they're wondering about. And they will notice, and they'll say, "Oh, how come, Daddy's sleeping in his office, or how come Mommy is sleeping on the couch?" And I'm not talking about one night, when somebody's snoring or falls asleep, the couch. And they will notice, and they will need an answer. When I was doing, what I always tell parents, or I'm telling people, that I do a lot of supervision now, I don't do any more guardian ad litem work, is that be honest, be sensitive about who your child is, not only their age and their stage, but who they are. Parents know their children better than anybody else. And be honest with them and tell them in a developmentally appropriate way. And as I talked about before, in a manageable way, with the manageable doses that we talked about. So this would be a good time, perhaps, to get, a consultation. It doesn't have to be ongoing. It could be for a particular issue. Because what I don't think an answer, Francine, is to say, "Oh, your mom and I are talking about getting divorced, but we don't know when it's going to happen, and we don't have any information about where you're going to live, who you're going to live with." Children, and the younger the child, except for toddlers or babies, they want concrete answers, which is why the generic opening is that, we're always going to love you. You're going to see both of us. We're going to, we want you to be happy and comfortable with both of us. And I think I'm glad you brought that up, because by the time that you do tell the children, have the talk with the children, you should have some answers sort of available. Whether it's, getting an apartment, whether we're going to stay here, but we're taking turns. I did have a couple of families who, in fact, both lived in the house, but then they decided they would have particular specific parenting times within the house. So, for example, there would be specific times that one parent would wake the children up, get them ready for school, feed them breakfast, etc., where the other one, and again, pre-COVID, might go to a gym, or might go there, and they might also, another parent might have do bedtimes, and the other parent come back either right before bedtime to say goodnight or not at all. So there can be lots and lots of flexibility, but again, the home, if people in the home don't want it, that it is just a space full of tension and conflict.
So one quick follow-up with that, what happens if one parent makes the announcement and tells the children without consultation with the other parent? What do you recommend, or what do you suggest? How does that other outsider parent deal with it?
Yeah. Well, as you saw in my do's and don'ts, that was one of my don'ts.
Right. But they don't always pay attention to do's and don'ts.
They do not always pay attention.
Sometimes
even when they're paying for the service, they don't pay attention. I think again, we have to use our common sense and knowledge. So if a parent has told the child is without, and they're not doing it together, then the other parent, well, first of all, if they can, they should at least then tell the other parent, I told the children today. I just want you to know that when I came home, when I took them out for breakfast this morning, I told the children, we're getting divorced. I told the children, you're moving out, I'm moving out. So at the very least, they should then contact the other parent. So then the other parent, when they see the child or children again, can say, I understand, daddy told you, mommy told you that whatever's going to happen. We're separating, we're not going to live together more, somebody's moving out. And then that parent can have their conversation, with their child, or ask, of course, their child saying, well, how'd you feel? What did you think? Do you have any questions? So then they can then do a follow-up. So that would be one way to save it. And then there might be some parents who plan ahead that they can't do it together for whatever extenuating circumstance. So then they could plan it, do it again in a planful, collaborative way, saying, okay, you tell them first when you have them so-and-so, and then they'll come and I will pick up from there. Because remember, that was the part of my little talk when I said you have to fake the calmness, right?
Right. Such good advice. And thank you, Sharon, for joining Francine and me for this webinar. This has been really informative for Francine and me, as well as hopefully for our audience. So thank you so much. And to everybody watching, thank you for tuning in and having this discussion with us. And check back soon for more Divorce Law Monitor webinars.
So good luck to everybody. Thank
you,
you.
Sharon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.